welcome to the Zero Ends channel. Please like and subscribe. Please enjoy our live.
Okay, this is chapter 10, section 2, the continue and conclusion of this chapter. In 1816, however, probably in February, a Negro woman belonging to Pauline Powell of Spotsylvania betrayed the scheme's military and police measures were at once instituted and above 30 slaves immediately arrested. Boxley, after vainly trying to organize a rescue party, fled. His family surrendered and was imprisoned, but with the flames of a candle and a file smuggled to him by his wife, escaped in May, and through a reward of $1,000 was offered, and he apparently was never recaptured. About 6 slaves were executed, and probably because of many appealed from white people for clemency. About 6 other condemned to hang were repudiated and banished. A favorite but unnamed slave belonging to a colonial chestnut betrayed a plot involving many slaves in and around Camden, South Carolina, about 1 month after Boxley escape. The 4th of July was the day selected for the outbreak, which was to have been started by setting fire to several houses. Espionage was used to uncover the ramifications of these widespread conspiracies. A letter from Camden, dated July 4th, stated that the Negroes had been discasting their schemes since the past December. It went on, and it says in quote, "Our galls is filled with Negroes. They are stretched on their backs on the bare floor and scarcely move their heads, but have a strong guard placed over them. This is really a dreadful situation to be in. I think it is time for us to leave a country where we cannot go to bed in safety." Now, mind you, this talking about the whites back in the day. They had so much of a fear that they feel that some of them didn't want to stay in America and want to go back to Europe. But that's I thought y'all, this is y'all homeland, your country that you conquered. Why are you so fear of these quote unquote slaves or these poor slaves that some of you, even in this same literature, feared your life? Isn't that something? But like I said, they always showed that our people were, they just took it back then, and they did not have the inclination to fight out of their oppression. Surprisingly, isn't that, ladies and gentlemen? But as we look into the history, it says otherwise. So, hold on, I'm trying to find my where I'm at. All right, this last sentence was deleted from the letter as published in the Richmond Inquiry, July 20th, 1816. Their thirsty for revenge must have been very great. It was the wish of some to spare some of the whites. And they mention an old gentleman who is a preacher. He never owned a slave and has devoted much of his time to preach to them on the plantation, but even him they would not spare. We are indebted to a slave for a discovery of this plan, but we shall never know who is, as he requests his master when he told him never to tell his name, he said he did not wish to leave this country, and he knew the Negroes would not let him live here. The Negroes will never know who betrayed them, for they tried to engage all for the great distant round. Now, mind you, my people, you have some of them today that will still snitch on you, and you will never know who snitched on you, because the ones that's close to you are the ones that's easy accessible to stab you in the back. Ironically, you have some of these snitch Negroes today. No different back almost 200 years ago, or even greater, over 300 years ago, which still happens today. Nothing changed. So let y'all know that. The informer status was, however, marked change as the legislator purchased his freedom for $1,100 and gave him a pension for life of $50. Now, if we know $50 back then, if we could mark it in today's number, it might be maybe close to $5,000 or less. I could be wrong, but I don't know how to do the logistics to do the number crunch of $50 back in the 1800s till now 21st century. 7 slave leaders were condemned to die, and 6 were hanged, one being pardoned just before execution after all preparations had been completed. Another was sentenced to a year imprisonment in iron, at the end of which time he was to be brandished, and the local paper report that. Upon trial, everyone who was most deeply implicated manifests the greatness apparent innocence, but upon convictions acknowledged the correctness of the court decisions, nor did they evince the least compunctions for having conceived and matured the design. It is melancholy to reflect that those who were most active in the conspiracy occupied a respectable stance. In one of the church's 7 were professors and 1 a class leader. At least 2 large-scale expeditions against communities of runaway, which annoyed and harassed slave owners, were carried out in 1816. The accounts of the 1 year Ashipo, South Carolina, given by Governor William in his legislative message on December is worth quoting, and this is his quotes. A few runaway Negroes concealed themselves in the swamps and marshes contingencies to Combahee and Ashpio rivers, not having been interrupted in their petty plundering for a long time, formed the nucleus round which all the ill-disposed and audacitaties near them gathered until at length their robberies, because too serious to be suffered with impunity, attempts were then made to disperse them, which either from insufficiencies of numbers or bad arrangements served by their failures only to encourage a wanton destruction of property. Their forces now became alarming, not less from its numbers than from the arms and ammunition with which it was supplied. The particular situations of the whole of that part of our coast return access to them difficulties, while the numerous creeks and waters, curious or courses through the marshes around the islands, furnish them easy opportunities to plunder not only planters in open day, but the inland coasting trades also without leaving a trace of their movements by which they could be pursued. I therefore order Major General Youngblood to take the necessary measures for suppressing them and authorize him to incur the necessary expense of such an expedition. This was immediately executed by a judicious employment of the militant under his command. He either captures or destroys the whole body. And that's the end of quote. A fort erected by British colony Nicholas at Apalachee Bay, Florida, was occupied after the English abandoned it by the Seminoles. The latter were driven out by a band of about 300 American fugitives, slave men, women, and children. Together with some 30 Indian allies, they took over the well-supplied fort and used it as a haven for other runways and as a base for marauding expeditions against slaveholders. The condition was very disturbing, and as has already been demonstrated, was loudly condemned by the Southern press, which clamors for the obliteration of the danger. In July 1816, United States troops under Colonel Duncan Clinch, together with some friendly Indians, set out to destroy the stranglehold. After a siege of about 10 days and the loss of 4 soldiers, the fort surrendered when the explosion results from a direct hit upon the magazines, but a hot cannon shot killed about 270 of fugitives. Out of the original occupations, some of 40 survived. This period of rather serious concerns, slave unrest produced, as usual, a crop of legal attachments aimed at the more secure maintenance of the institution of human bondage. The two schools, reformists and repressionists, again were in conflict, and once more the former came out second best in Georgia. However, a few reformers' status came into existence. It was there provided that the state might pay for the support of any old or informed slave abandoned by their owners and charge them with the cost. In 1816, it declared that if any individual, not being the owner or his agent, were to hurt a slave without cause, or if the owner himself were cruel, a word left undefined to the slave, he might be fined or imprisoned. No sum or period states. The next year, Georgia puts the murder of Negroes, so far as the law books were concerned, on the same foot as the killing of whites. The laws for adding repression were much more numerous and more susceptible of enforcement. Thus, in 1811, the state of Delaware forbade the immigration of free Negroes. Any entering were to be given 10 days' notice to leave, after which, not having left, they were to be subject to a weekly fine of $10. Any native free Negro who left the state and remained away over 6 months was to be considered a non-resident. Georgia in 1810 required income free Negroes to register and give full detail concerning themselves and their reason for entering the states. In 1818, free Negroes were forbidden to enter the states, and those in it were required to register each year and were either to own slaves nor real estate. Manumission was forbidden, with any one attempt to label to a fine of $1,000. The next year, the regulations concerned ownership of the land or slave was declared not to be retroactive, and free Negroes were permitted to own real estate not or outside of Darien, Savannah, and Augusta. I think this is in Georgia. Yeah, it is in Georgia. I'm right. In December 1816, South Carolina passed a drastic law forbidding the importation of slaves from any part of the United States, but repeating the pattern following during the last period of the Great Unrest. This law was repealed in 1818. And that needs a highlight right there. Looks like there was an attempt to stop the slavery or slave trade, or actually slavery altogether in one part of this state. If it was 1816 and then repealed 1818, that's a period of, if my math is right, almost 48 years or 47. I think it's 47 years because no, I'm right, 40 something years. Yep. Let's continue. Kentucky in 1811 declared conspiracy of or poisoning by slave crimes punishable by death. In 1815, it forbade the introduction of slaves for sale. Georgia, the next year, declared the execution or exciting or attempting to excite rebellion a capital crime. Louisiana, in 1814, provided a death penalty for any slave willfully shedding the blood of whites. The same year, it provided that every 30 slave on a plantation there was to be present at least one white adult male, and parish judge were twice a year to visit the plantation to see that this law was abide. And 2 years later, this state provides that no slave might serve as a witness against whites or free Negroes unless the latter were involved in a slave plot or outbreaks. Any slave shouting or stabbing a white was to die. And any guilty of arson or administering poison was to be imprisoned in chains and at hard labor for life. The territory of Mississippi in 1812 required each militant captain to form a patrol and levy a fine of $5 against anyone not performing patrol duties, or in lieu of that, providing a substitute. The return of peace and some measures of prosperity were again followed by a brief period of relative thought, by no means absolute calm amongst American slaves. Again, part of the explanation for this may have been an increased alertness on the part of the refueling class, reinforcing by recent acts of repression, together with the growth of a feeling akin of exhaustion on the part of a victim. Occasionally, episodes of mass discontent were forever reported. On Easter Monday, April 7, 1817, several outbursts of slaves, possibly spontaneous but believed by some contemporary to have result from a pre-concording plan occurring in St. Mary County, Maryland. Approximately 200 Negroes were involved. Several whites were injured by stick, bricks, bats, and other missiles, and 2 houses were stacked before police and patrols restored order. Maroon activities of notable proportions distribute South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina. Throughout the following year, the disturbance in Wake County of the later states became serious enough in November to invoke considerable notice from the local press, which advised the patrol to keep a strict lookout. Later, attacks upon a store by a maroon bandit of Negroes, led by Audrey Ellis, Billie Jean, better known here by the name of Abelion. I think that's how she spelled her name, or he, wherever the person's called. Abelion was repulsed by armed residents. It was believed that the death of at least one white man, if not more, might accurately be placed at their hands, through Governor Branch offering sustainable rewards for the capture of 8 specific outlaws. There is no record of his having to make good on the offer. So it looked like he take your money. He said he was going to offer something and did not pay on that offer. Sounds familiar? And please, if y'all on the building, please, like the stream. In the spring of 1819, slaves of Augusta, Georgia, enter into a conspiracy very much like that in Camden, South Carolina. 3 years before, this too was to start by firing the city, and this too was betrayed. A white man, Alexander Russell, not answering when hailed by one of the guards posted in the city on the occasional, was shot and killed. Several of the rebels were executed. The leader of the plot was a slave named Coot, or Coco, who had arranged a pretty extensive plan of operation, and if it had gotten underway, would have caused much havoc of personal and property. During his trial, he maintained a bold and impudent effrontery. And maybe we should look at that definition of imputed effrontery. And I'll spell it for people, so people can look this word up. It is spelled Effrontery. Y'all should look that up. I won't do it right now because this is winding down. And not a muscle move when the verdict of death was pronounced against him. The punishment of another of the slaves involved, Paul, was described as following. He was to receive 25 lashes every 30 days until he had received a total of 250, was then to be branded with the letter R on his left cheek and to have his ears cut off. Oh, that's a price he paid for rebelling. But like always, what the cost of freedom is actual death. And the black man of that time paid a very heavy price to make the comforts of the American blacks today to enjoy the fruits of labor of what your ancestors have laid for back then. An outlaw community in Williamsburg County, South Carolina, was attacked in July 1819, with the results that 3 Negroes were killed, a few hundred or a few others were captured, and one of the attackers, white men, was wounded. And that is the end of chapter 10. So, a lot of fear back then. So much fear that even back then, some of the, Caucasoids or slave owners at then was even because of the amount of slaves they had around. And if you remember the movies that show not only the slave plantation, the buck farms and all that stuff, they never really showed the fear that these people had having so many slaves as servants. And the thought of it alone, with the amount of historical information of not only the revolts, but the plots and conspiracy that the slaves had, that one day they were going to kill to be free, was there. It was always been there. And the funny thing about all this, that even some were so scared, the slave master, some of them wanted to go back to Europe, where they didn't want to be around no Negro at that time. So, to really say in conclusion to all this, is that you have to know that at the end of the day, your ancestors did not just lay down and just took it. And just that portion of 1800 to close to let me see the year again. And that was a period of 1810 through 1819. And it only dealt with some part of the Maroon War, Seminole Wars, in that particular chapter. And I think going further into this book, it might talk more about that. But before we lead up to the Maroons, or what we call the Seminole, where are black people, not just Indians. Regular slaves that was not called, Maroons or what they want to call Seminoles, put in some work. And throughout the history that they don't talk about, they don't really give you clarity on that in your history books, much less your school system don't teach that. And my thing with school now, if I'm gonna keep it 100, y'all, it is not anything that will serve anybody to really make the average person that goes into any institution, where they're pre-K to 12 and maybe levels of college, to really make people prepare them for not only life but a way to compete against a capitalist system. But that's just my thoughts on that. But like I said, I hope you enjoyed this particular chapter. Go back to chapter section 1 and now section 2 of this chapter, 1810 to 1819. And like always, be on the lookout for the next chapter, which will now go into chapter 11 of this book. Thank you again for listening to tonight's stream. Until next time, take care now. Goodbye.